Hi, this is Peter with Alphachimp, and this is part 2 in a series on the brain and scribing. And today's segment is called Brain Juice. There are 3 essential chemicals to be aware of when working with other humans or with yourself. And these chemicals drive our emotions and help us to regulate how we feel at any given time. So, I have a question for you. Who is 6'7" and loves cuddles? This guy, Dr. Love, also known as Dr. Paul Zak. Paul Zak has done a tremendous amount of research on oxytocin, which is also known as the love chemical. And that's the first in our series of chemicals. Oxytocin is the neurochemical that is responsible for our feelings of love, affection, and trust. The second that we're going to talk about today is dopamine. Dopamine is known as the pleasure chemical, and it is what is released whenever we have a feeling of accomplishment, satisfaction, or things like exercise or physical pleasure. The third chemical, which we talked about in the first video, cortisol. Cortisol is closely attached to stress, and none of these chemicals are positive or negative, good or bad, but they can have effects on our emotional state and our physical state. In working with other people, it's important to know that these chemicals are constantly operating along with thousands of other chemicals in a vast soup in our brain. And when I look out at a crowd of humans that I'm teaching or working with as a facilitator or as a graphic recorder, you can start to sense when the cortisol levels are rising collectively. This is when people start to look tense, stressed, have body language that's closed or agitated. And cortisol is not positive or negative. It's very necessary. It's the chemical that's released that tells us that it's important to move. And so this is the fight or flight chemical. Oxytocin is released, and you can see it in a crowd when people are laughing, when they're touching each other on the shoulder, when they're really engaged and relaxed, because there's a feeling of trust between all the people in the room. Dopamine is released when there's a sense of accomplishment. So you can see this when you're working with a group and let's say you have a game or you have a contest and there's a lot of struggle, maybe anxiety. Cortisol is being released as the anxiety level rises, but then somebody wins or something is accomplished and there's that feeling of, that's awesome. That's dopamine. So one way to remember these is just DOC. And this is helpful, especially if you are designing events or working with other facilitators, because you can talk a little knowledgeably about what's happening in the room. So when people are saying, we don't want any of that touchy-feely stuff, you can say, hey, you know what? The cortisol level seems to be pretty high in here. There's a lot of stress, anxiety. It's actually going to be very positive in making a learning environment if we do something fun that helps people to feel relaxed, feel connected, and if we play a game so that they can feel that sense of accomplishment. So these are a couple of things that I'd like to share with you that perhaps are useful. And if you have any comments or any other questions, please include them in the comments below. Thanks a lot.